Hello, YouTube, and welcome to Angular Air. Today's a lighter episode, just the two of us here chatting today. My name is Mike Brocky. No longer with Justin and Alyssa, at least for this week. I get mute. But welcome to Angular Air today. We are going to be chatting, I am going to be chatting with Manfred Steyer. Manfred, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular, and I'm focusing on Angular for enterprise scale applications. In this role, I'm helping a lot of companies with consulting and with trainings. And meanwhile, I do this mainly in Europe, but sometimes I'm happy to work together with people around the globe. We are allowed to fly again, which is great, and we have remote technologies. For some reason, we learned to intensely use remote technologies in the last 3 years. I don't know why, but that's the case.
Awesome. So when you talk about enterprise scale, are you talking about the size of the company, the size of an application, the number of applications? What constitutes enterprise?
Hmm. Well, most of the times it's the size of the application plus the amount of time in that the application needs to be maintained. So if you have one larger team or perhaps even several teams working on something that needs to maintain in the long term, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then this is where I come in. Of course, if I have a smaller application, I can help you too, but most of the things I'm dealing with are for those enterprise scale applications.
Excellent. So, with working with enterprise applications, I'm sure you work a lot with trying to determine best practices. And are those things that you pull from the community, things that you collaborate on, or things that you develop on your own? How do you determine those types of strategies?
Well, it depends. At the end of the day, somehow it needs to serve my story. It needs to serve the story of being maintainable in the long term and of helping one big team or several teams to work together. And so, yeah, it comes to best practices, of course, things like a monorepo approach on the one side, but also things like domain-driven design, which is quite an old idea, but nevertheless, it's still valid and it still helps us to subdivide our application into use case specific stuff that can be maintained on its own, that allows us to change something here without breaking something there.
It's a
Those are
very
just two examples. Other examples are things like state management or things like authentication. I do a lot with token-based security, OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, but also things like micro frontends, which has a lot of consequences. Not all of them are positive, but if you figure out that you have more positive consequences when applying them, then you should give them a try or should have a closer look to them.
I like the way that you phrase that because I forget who I was chatting with not too long ago. It was in the last week or two, but the answer to just about any technology question is it depends. And that's exactly what your answer is, that it depends. So micro front ends might be the right answer for you, depending upon what you have going on within your organization and why
Yeah,
you
yeah,
might be
totally.
trying to use that technology.
I'm really an advocate for micro frontends, but nevertheless, I think meanwhile I advised more companies against them because, yeah, they need to fit. They need to fit to your structure, to your company, and to the issue you want to solve. And if you use something, regardless if it is state management or micro frontends or something else, if you use something without needing it, then you will just increase the complexity of your system, and this makes it more difficult to be maintained.
I like to make the point of to closely evaluate your dependencies, and what those things are with micro front ends or state management is not so much an individual dependency that you're adding to your package JSON, but more so an architectural concept that you're adopting at a higher level. So essentially the same idea, but at a grander scale.
Mhm.
You have to ensure that the value something is providing is greater than the cost of bringing it in.
Yeah. So the benefit should be higher than the pain. And yeah, if this is the
Absolutely.
case, then have a closer look at it totally.
Absolutely.
And yeah, people always say, ha ha ha, it depends, consultancy answer. But I think it's really that at the end of the day, if you sum it up, if you have a bit more time, then you don't say it depends, then you say, well, you have some goals and you want to achieve those goals. And on the other side, you have options. And some of those options might be more beneficial to achieve the goals than other ones. However, this also shows that we really need to know about our architectural goals. And it shows that we need to bring them into an order, because otherwise we cannot say what is more beneficial than what else, what brings more advantages than disadvantages. And bringing stuff in an order, bringing your goals into an order can be quite challenging.
Very, very true. And that's where consultants, why consultants are brought in, not just to understand what the pros and cons are or what the different options are, but how to properly evaluate them against the goals, as you mentioned, of what an organization needs to make sure that you have a fit for the desires that are needed, both from the technical and from the business side,
Yeah.
the challenges of
Having
consulting.
having a fresh view on it, a view from an outsider's perspective can help here.
Very true. So do you have slides or anything else that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I have prepared some slides.
Excellent. You want to share those, and I'll bring those in.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah. So what I prepared today is something the lead of the Angular team called the Angular Renaissance. And I want to use this Angular Renaissance, all those new features that showed up recently in Angular, to implement a more modern architecture and perhaps even a more lightweight architecture that, even though fits our needs, helps us to reach our architectural goals. So I'm quite sure you know this fairy tale of the three tiny piglets. The first piglet was a bit lazy. It built its house out of straw, and the big bad wolf destroyed it immediately. Also, the second piglet was a bit lazy. It built a wood house, and also here the big bad wolf destroyed it. However, the third piglet was not lazy. He did quite an effort. He invested quite a lot into its house. And so it built a brick house, a massive brick house. And that meant that the big bad wolf was not capable of destroying it. They could hide in there, all the three piglets. And they have been safe. And I think this is quite a nice metaphor for software architecture. So a nice metaphor. So nice, and it is not only nice, it's also wrong. It's wrong. I'm very sorry. Our parents betrayed us, the Easter rabbit, Santa Claus, and now the three piglets. This metaphor is wrong if the conclusion is the more the better. More helps more. No, this is not the case. Because if we look at our architecture, there is a spectrum. On the one side, we have under-engineering. On the other side, we have over-engineering. And trust me, both is bad. I really know that both is bad because I tried out both. When I was a young engineer, then everything was under-engineered. I just wanted to provide value to ship my project. And then I concentrated on software architecture, and suddenly everything was over-engineered because I tried to apply all the patterns I've learned about. And this was where I had to learn the hard way that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. Perhaps it's difficult to reach the sweet spot, to exactly reach it. I think this is more art than engineering, but I think nevertheless we should try to find out where this sweet spot is. And this is what this presentation is about. This presentation is about better meeting the sweet spot with my Angular architecture. And for this, the Angular Renaissance, all those pretty new features can really help. And this is what this agenda is about. I want to get started with standalone components. I want to proceed with custom standalone APIs. We talk about functional services. And obviously, in 2023, there cannot be an Angular talk without signals. That's why I also have a bonus concentrating on signals. So I've already introduced myself. I'm Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant. I'm focusing on Angular in the enterprise. I'm quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany, and I'm always happy to work together with people around the world. Okay, let's get started with standalone components. You know, when Angular arrived in 2016, we got ng modules. And in the best case, ng modules have just been annoying. Just annoying because suddenly we had two module systems to deal with. TypeScript modules, to be more precise, ECMAScript modules, and Angular modules. So if we were lucky, they have just been annoying. If we were not lucky, they have been a showstopper for new people entering the world of Angular. They increase the learning curve. And that's why I'm really happy that since about a year, they are optional. Just put this standalone flag to true and, you know, Bob's your uncle, you can use them without any ng modules. They can live on their own. However, to be able to live on their own, to survive on themselves, you need to define the so-called compilation context, which is this imports array telling the compiler what we can use inside of this template. The compilation context, or as I call it, the neighborhood of the component. This compilation context, this imports array, is an exhaustive list. You need to list everything in there you want to use in the template. And obviously, an exhaustive list is quite exhaustive. And that's why we need something better here. There are several takes on this. A first take is something I have implemented a click dummy for, a very simple click dummy. The idea is you write something like this into your template, my component and ngif. And if you do this, something needs to happen. Someone needs to appear, someone who hasn't been around for quite a time. You know him, Clippy. Clippy needs to appear, and Clippy has to tell me, hey, Manfred, it looks like you want to use ngf and my component. Shall I import it for you? And I say, yes, please import it for me. And then Clippy will maintain this exhaustive list, this import array. And funnily, the Angular team implemented something like this. Unfortunately, without Clippy, I'm very sorry, but Dylan Han, who is part of the Angular team, already let us know about, I think, 9 months ago, that he is working on this, that he is implementing a feature like this for the Angular language service, which is, for instance, part of the plugin for VS Code. It's just a quick fix that allows you to click this light bulb, and then the entry is auto-imported into the imports array. And because it's part of the Angular language service, you can use it with most of the IDEs out there. If you go with, let's say, IntelliJ or with WebStorm, then you find there an own implementation of them. They did it a bit earlier. They did it upfront by themselves. That means you have features like this in all the major IDEs nowadays. And that's beautiful, if you ask me. However, this brings us to another question, namely, what does this mean for our architecture? Or to put it in another way, it's almost a tongue twister for me. how to do modularization without any modules. And the first answer to this might seem to be a bit too easy to be true. The first answer is just go with a meaningful folder structure. Structure your application according to your features. That's quite smart because normally everything that belongs to a feature is somehow changed together. And that's why it's a good idea to have everything that belongs to a feature in there into one folder structure. This is a first easy answer. A second answer is, well, perhaps you want to go with a barrel, an index.ts file that defines your public API. Everything that is exported here might be used by other parts of your system, perhaps even by other teams in your monorepo. Everything that is not exported here is your little tiny secret. And trust me, it's good to have little tiny secrets because everything you keep a secret can be changed afterwards. You can exchange it, you can throw it away, you can rewrite it, you can buy it from a third-party vendor, does not matter. But everything you are exposing here should be backwards compatible. Otherwise, you lose all your friends on the team because otherwise you will break their code. I've tried it out. It did not pay off. So please don't do it. Please don't break exported stuff. Here in this case, I was quite restrictive. I just exported my routing configuration. That means the components behind my routes are just part of my black box. No one should be interested into it. Of course, having a parallel is nice. However, we cannot force people to not bypass our barrel, to not bypass it and grab into the inner workings, into the private areas of our folder structure. We cannot prevent people, at least with traditional JavaScript, but in some minutes I have a solution for you that tells people, hey, come on, don't do it. Don't enter the building through the window. Please enter the building through this front door.
That's when the code review process within an organization becomes important. Without the tooling to be able to support it, the team needs to be able to manage and run that support.
Yeah, totally. I've seen some projects where people did this afterwards. But if doing this afterwards, it's always painful, isn't it? Because then you find out after 2 years, well, we need to change everything, or we should change everything. So what I have in mind is a linting rule that helps you to prevent this upfront, to find out immediately that you access something you are not allowed to access.
And I like that because by creating a linting rule, you can evaluate the code that's already there to be able to clean up your technical debt in a more thorough manner than I think we might be using it here or there. But to be able to have tooling to be able to support that type of cleanup is awesome.
Cool. Makes totally sense, yeah. Okay, so if we go one step further, if you have a large application with several teams working on it, then you might want to subdivide this application into business domains. To put it in a nutshell, this is just about identifying areas of your application. Quite often those areas correlate with areas in the real world, and those areas should be changeable without affecting other areas, like boarding, check-in, luggage, or ticketing here. And to make it possible to change them without affecting other business domains, you need here an access restriction, and restriction telling you, hey, you are not allowed to grab over to this other area. If you want to share something, go via the shared folder or use other tactics, but don't directly access something from within there. And to do something like this, you need linting rules. And NX is one of those tools I'm using a lot for enterprise scale applications, and they provide linting rules as such. Linting rules telling you, hey, Manfred, hands off, you are not allowed to grab in there. NX also provides you with a lot of other features important for enterprise scale applications, like you can visualize your project structure, you can do incremental compilation and testing. That means only the stuff that has been changed is recompiled and retested. Saves you a lot of time. NX works a lot with libraries. That means here you need to subdivide your application into libraries. A colleague of mine who really liked NX is doing something similar with his project called Sheriff. However, the Sheriff is doing the same on a per folder basis. So it's a bit more lightweight here. And for this, I have prepared a demonstration. Let's have a look into this application. So this is a simple application. I use it a lot for my trainings and workshops. It's just about searching for flights. If we are lucky, like now, it's also about finding flights, and that's it, more or less. However, if we look into the source code, the first thing we are seeing is we are just going with standalone components. That means we don't have any ng modules anymore. We have this standalone flag, and we have the compilation context. And here we also see standalone components are super duper backwards compatible to the traditional world of Angular. We can import modules, which was one of the architectural goals of the Angular team, because they knew that introducing breaking changes is something they should prevent. And so they really focused on backwards compatibility.
Yeah. I don't want to derail, but you have blank lines before and after the material ones. Is that similar in concept of organizing imports, like module TypeScript imports at the top of a file based off of framework and then libraries and then local?
So it could be a good idea. My intention here was to just make you see at first glance that something special is going on here.
Okay.
That's why just for presentational purposes, I added those white lines, those white spaces.
No, that makes sense as well. And to that point, best practices of how to best use standalone and later when we talk about signals are going to be shake out over time. So just know that you're early adopting new technology, and there's going to be changes of recommendations that come out.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we cannot force everyone into migrating everything now on the point to standalone. Even the Angular team is using modules, for instance, for Angular material. Like here.
Agreed.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is really a cool thing and a cool attitude from the Angular team. They are making sure that everything still works. They are not breaking stuff. They are adding new goodness. Okay, so besides this, we can also now bootstrap a standalone component, which also makes the application more lightweight, because in former days, we bootstrapped an ng module. That means when bootstrapping the application, we needed to point to a module that pointed to a bootstrap array that in turn pointed to your app component, which was a lot of indirections. But now we can just point to the app component and one more time, pops your answer. Okay, now let's have a look to my folder structure. I have here a folder with domains. This is where my business domains live. And here I have two subfolders, one with check-in and one with ticketing. Those are my two domains. And in there, let's say within ticketing, we have some, I call it layers. I have a feature layer with several features. I have a UI layer with general purpose UI components, dump components that are reused throughout my features. And I have my data layer that is taking care of data access, talking with the backend, providing some types and interfaces, mirroring my domain and the concepts in my domain, like a ticket, a passenger, a flight. If I look in here to feature booking, we see standalone stuff like my flight booking standalone component. So it's quite lightweight. And the interface to the outside is this index.ts that defines what other people are allowed to use. And when we move in there to, let's say, flight search, here I have prepared 2 lines that try to break the rules. They try to grab over into another domain. Obviously, here I'm in my ticketing domain. You see it up here somewhere. No? You have to trust me, I'm in my ticketing domain. And now I try to grab over to the check-in domain. And that's not allowed. That's forbidden. Someone told me when using the German word for forbidden in English, it is stressing the word in forbidden a bit, which is verboten here. So seems like some people use the German word to say strictly forbidden. This is really verboten. Don't do it. Yeah, and we have the same here. Here I try to bypass the index.ts file. My data layer has a service, I called it hidden service. It's not part of the index.ts. And yeah, when I try to access this hidden service, I also get the information, hey, don't do a deep import. Don't grab into the depth of this part of the application. By the way, the error message here is you don't have clearance. You are in the ticketing domain. You see it here. You don't have any clearance for domain check-in. Seeing this in the IDE when typing is necessary, of course. We need to know that we messed up so that we can correct it immediately. However, I also like it that the linker is telling us the same on the command line. Because what happens on command line can be automated.
So as that's running, the configuration, because I noticed that the error message when you hovered over, then we'll probably see here in the console as well, that you're crossing a domain boundary, basically.
Yeah.
Where are you able to define where your domains live, or is there some sort of convention that it uses to determine of, hey, you can reach deep into this folder, but not this other folder?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what Sheriff is doing, it does a bit of convention over configuration.
Okay.
Sheriff is assuming that a folder with an index.ts is a module on a logical level. And for such a module, it is not allowing deep imports. It forces you to go via the index.ts. And then there is a little tiny configuration file, the Sheriff config. However, it's also quite slim. This is everything. It tells you, for instance, let's have a look here, that everything in the domain folder is a domain of its own. Each and every subfolder of domains is a domain of its own. So this here plus domain is just a placeholder. In this case, it stands for, let's say, ticketing or check-in. And if I add another folder, let's say boarding, then it can also stand for boarding. And then it says, well, let's have a look at the next folder level. If someone starts with feature, then it's part of that domain, ticketing, check-in, or boarding, and it's part of type feature. And if it starts with UI, it's also part of the same domain, but it also has the type UI. And then depending on those tags here, we are defining rules like feature is allowed to access this, that, and that. Or UI is allowed to access this and that. Or if you are in a domain asterisk, which is also a placeholder, a wildcard, then you are only allowed to access the same domain. and the shared part of your application. So it's looking at your folder structure, and it is inferring a lot of stuff from the folder structure so that we don't need to configure that much here.
I like that. And this isn't necessarily Angular specific. This could be anything else to be able to enforce these linting rules.
Yeah, totally. It is just using TypeScript. It has been highly influenced by NX because we like NX and we like how they are working. And it works in a similar way. It is asking the TypeScript language service to give us an overview of all the files. And so we have a graph. We know how everything is interconnected. And this helps us to get all the metadata for saying, well, it's okay, or no, this is not okay.
It's interesting as I look at what you have there, the domain / and then the what looks like a domain tag. To me, that reads a whole lot like an Angular route of domain / domain in my mind, because it's essentially a variable replacement within there. Wow.
Yeah, it is. Cool.
I like this.
Thank you. Yeah, we had the idea for quite a time, and some months ago, my colleague told me, well, I have some time now, I can implement it, and yeah, we also liked it.
Is there documentation for what is available within this config file, and are there any suggested templates of, hey, use this to start structuring your applications?
Yeah, you can look it up at the page of the npm package.
Okay.
And besides this, my colleague is also planning to do a CLI that gives you a default configuration, for instance.
Excellent.
Cool. Yeah, so no broken windows anymore. We also have here the same error messages on the command line. Don't do deep inboards, and make sure you have the clearance for accessing this or that. And yeah, you can use it to check the code, the source code, before it's merged into your main branch or dev branch, depending on the style you are using. So, by the way, if you say, well, I like this, but unfortunately, I have existing code that is not using standalone stuff, then you can, of course, migrate your application to standalone. You don't have to. Everything still works. You don't need to worry and hurry. But if you really love standalone, you can migrate to standalone. And for this, the Angular team is shipping meanwhile a schematic. Perhaps you've seen it. It arrived with 15.2, and it's called Angular Core Standalone. If you run this, you get 3 stages you can select from. Normally, I start with the first stage, and then I go on with the further stages. And in each stage, a little tiny aspect of your application is migrated. After each stage, you can check the source code. If everything is fine for you, you can correct it a bit, and then you can go on with the next stage. And when you are done, you have standalone. It really works well. I'm really impressed by how well it works. And you can only do it if you want. You can only do it for a little tiny portion of your repository. You can do it for everything, but you can just try it out with this or that domain or this or that feature. Okay, so let's jump to the second aspect I've prepared for you. I'm calling it the little brother, the little sister of standalone components. It's standalone APIs. It's all about setting up a library without any ng module. The HTTP client, for instance, gives us provide HTTP client, or the router gives us provide router. We can use it when bootstrapping the application with bootstrap application by pointing to our standalone entry component.
So when you say you're talking about this is helpful with libraries, are we talking about libraries within a given application, or are we talking about external like third-party libraries or both?
Well, I would really say both. I would really say both because if you think a huge application, you quite often have tiny parts of your application that should be isolated somehow. You want to you want them to be a black box. You want that not everyone else is accessing everything of it, but perhaps people should access a little tiny portion of it. And perhaps not everyone should be able to tweak everything inside of it, but just to tweak a little tiny portion of it. And this is where this pattern comes in, if you ask me.
I like it.
What's really nice here is this naming pattern the Angular team is going with. If something starts with provide, it's about providing, registering a library. And if it starts with, then it's about adding an optional feature. And by the way, it's really funny, but this design, this decision makes the router more tree shakeable. Also the HTTP client. That means just because of this, as a byproduct of standalone stuff, your bundles shrink a bit because they are better tree shakeable. Really nice. And yeah, we could do the same with our own stuff. If you had a locker or some other stuff inside of your repository, then you could also provide a provide function for it that makes your library a black box or perhaps a gray box. Perhaps you define a configuration object that allows the consumer to tweak it a bit, to tweak it in a well-defined way.
I like
And you
that.
could also add some additional optional features they could activate.
I have a library that I'm looking at publishing as well. So conceptually, with an ng module, a lot of the initialization logic would get placed inside of a constructor or a for root type function inside of an ng module. That logic would then move inside the definition of the provide logger function that's exposed, because you can trust that that function is being run when it's being provided, just like you would with a constructor or a static function on the ng module.
Yeah, totally, totally. I think actually this is a nice way to put it because this is really a replacement for those static for root, for child, for feature methods. Yeah.
This fits in with the idea of things within Angular becoming more functional and less class based. Being that we're providing a function here, and we're providing utilizing that function here instead of supplying a class, and then
Totally.
a arbitrary convention of using for root and for child with something that is purely just a function.
Yeah, totally, totally. And a naming pattern like we had for something, for child, for root. Now we have provide and with. Yeah. And as you say, it seems like that the future of the whole ECMAScript ecosystem is functional. It's a bit easier, less to type, and this is one step into this very direction.
Not that classes don't have their place and their the right usages, but functions sometimes make a lot more sense than providing an entire class.
Yeah, I feel you. Okay, so before we do something like this, I have another rule. I'm calling it the golden rule of injectables, namely, whenever possible, don't go with your own provider function, just go with provided in root. Because it's easy. It's easy and it works. Plus, and this might come as a surprise, provided in root even works with lazy loading. I know it's called provided in root, but nevertheless, it works with lazy loading, which is not the achievement of Angular itself. It's an achievement of your bundler that normally puts the source code where it's needed. And if something is only needed in a lazy part of your application, it's exactly put there. So whenever possible, go with this pattern. However, if you want to squeeze in something special by passing a configuration object or if you want to activate an optional feature, then you need something like this here. I think a very good example for this is the router. It needs the routing configuration, or the store, which needs a store configuration, the feature, the reducers, sometimes also the effects.
I think that there's also the idea of needing to run some sort of initialization logic upon app start. Would be a good use case here as well.
Yeah. Of course, you can register an initializer, or you can run some logic directly in there. Okay, yeah, let's have a look into this. So if we look into my main TS, here I'm providing all my providers, HTTP client, the router, and here we go with my logger. And yeah, the logger gives me the possibility to tweak the behavior a bit by passing in this logger configuration. And now let's have a look into the inner workings of this function. If we look at the inner workings, we see, well, it's just a traditional function, and it takes a configuration, something from the type of my configuration. However, to be a bit more developer friendly, I'm also accepting a partial configuration. That means the consumer only needs to define the properties they want to tweak. If they are fine with some default values, they don't need to repeat those configuration properties. It's just a partial configuration, and we have a REST array with features. We will talk about features in some minutes. As the configuration is only a partial one, I'm merging it together with my default configuration. That means I get my default config, and for everything the partial config is defining something, I get those values. And this is my merged configuration. Now let's jump to the end here. Basically, everything you need to do here is you just need to export an array with providers. And those providers can be static providers in the sense of providers that are there every time, but they can also be dynamic in the sense that they are somehow influenced by your configuration you are passing. Like the configuration itself, or here just one of the properties of your configuration that is defining a formatter function for formatting your log messages. I also have a concept of an appender. An appender is just a mechanism that is appending the log message to a log, which could be the console, the JavaScript console in your browser, or it could be a server-side log or a fake log for unit testing, something like this. When it comes to optional features, then we just talk about further functions that can also have their configuration, and those functions return something from the type logger feature. In this case, it's logger feature. In the case of the router, it's a router feature, and so on. And such a feature only has two properties. The first property is called kind. It defines the kind of the feature. It's a categorization. For instance, here I have a category that is a color feature. And I say, well, let's check if we have more than one color feature. Let's check for the length. Because having more than one color feature does not work out. Perhaps you know Pink Panther. I think it was a common joke there that Pink Panther is painting something in big, and this little tiny guy is painting something in blue, and then they compete over the color. Is it blue? Is it pink? And they are changing back and forth all the times. And this is what I want to prevent here, this Pink Panther issue. We can only have one color feature. If we have more than one color feature, I am throwing an exception. This is not an invention of myself. I've borrowed this idea from the HTTP client. They use this very pattern in there. There is, for instance, one feature for activating cross-site request forgery tokens, XSRR tokens. You can activate them. And there is another, no, you can deactivate them. And there is another feature for configuring them. However, configuring them and deactivating them does not make sense. And so they really make sure that you can only have one of those XSRR features. And here I'm doing the same. Here I'm only allowing one of those features. If I'm allowing all the features, then I'm just taking the providers from this very feature and putting it into my provider array I'm returning. That means each and every feature is carrying two things piggyback. The first thing is a categorization, and the second thing is a provider array I need to activate when I allow this very feature. And that's it. Well, there is a little tiny technical aspect. I told you before, basically, this is just a providers array, basically. However, the thing is, you can use a providers array when bootstrapping the application, but also inside of a component. If we look, for instance, into, let's say, my flight card component, it's gone. Let's go with flight search. Then we could easily have a provider array that sets up the logger or the router. And this is something the Angular team wants to be prevented, because some libraries are not prepared to be set up inside of a component. They are not prepared for this. The router has not been implemented in mind with the capability to be used inside of a component. The router is always outside of the components and routing between them. And so they really wanted to prevent this very situation. And what they did, the Angular team, was a quite smart move, if you ask me. They came up with an artificial type called environment providers. It's really an artificial type, just a wrapper around a providers array. However, if you go with this type, then the type system can make sure that this new type is not allowed inside of components. However, it's allowed when bootstrapping the application. So to cut a long story short, wrap up your providers with this function here, make environment providers. It gives you this wrapper, this environment providers object, and one more time, pops your uncle.
Is that function exposed by Angular core then?
Yeah, it's exposed by Angular core.
Okay.
Where do we have it?
Up top.
Oh yeah, it's here. Yeah.
That makes sense,
Okay.
because then you could potentially provide that functionality other places within your libraries.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I have another thing prepared. I'm calling it functional services. I really like it. I'm quite sure most of people that are watching know router guards. In the past, a guard was a service that implemented an interface, and so we needed to implement a method. The whole service needed to be registered as a provider and referenced in the router configuration. Phew. This was quite a lot, wasn't it?
Quite.
Now they are functional. That means you just put in the best case, a lambda expression that is getting hold of this or that service via inject, and that's it. Of course, if you have more than a one-liner, you could put all of this into a function and reference the function here, but still this is less effort than this whole ceremony with the service implementing an interface and so on. We have the same situation with resolvers. They are also functional now, and they can be just a lambda expression. And we have the same situation with interceptors. They are also functions now, and you can provide them as an optional feature with the HTTP client. It comes with this with interceptors function, and yeah, this allows you to activate the code for interceptors. Here you pass in your very interceptor.
So you were describing these as functional services. Do you envision the idea of functional services expanding beyond just guards, resolvers, and interceptors?
I think we can do it, especially if we otherwise just had a service with one method. I have it here, for instance. My logger takes such a formatter function. It takes all the parts of a log message, the category, the message, the log label, and it somehow makes a nice format out of those data points. So yeah, if you just have one method inside of your services, you could think about going functional, less ceremony.
My one concern, and this goes beyond just functional services, but of utilization of inject, is the ease of testing. When testing using dependency injection,
Yeah.
at a class level, it's very easy to override something that's coming in through the constructor because you just replace it. Say, hey, I want to create a new one. Here's my other instance. But to do that with the inject function involves jumping through a little bit more hoops to override what inject is. Although you could just override the inject function, um, depending upon what
Yeah,
you're
I
looking
feel
for.
you. I feel you. This is really a valid concern. If you use the test bed, it should not be an issue because then you can mock everything in here. But if you don't go with the test bed, then you need to find your own way of exchanging this service. That's right. You can mock the inject function, or perhaps you go with your own inject function. I would really love to see the Angular team coming up with a nice solution for this.
Yes, I love the idea of the inject function, but like I said, the testability and the added complications to set up your test that way is what's preventing me from utilizing it more. Aside from using inject on as a
Mm,
constructor parameter. Yeah.
yeah, that's also of course possible. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you liked those topics, I have this free ebook here where I am explaining all those ideas. Feel free to download it. And if you did not like this topic, download it anyway, because I'm better with writing than with speaking. Okay, so I have a bonus because I told you in 2023 there should not be any Angular talk without signals. So let's have a look into them quite quickly. So we all know perhaps that a signal is just a data structure wrapped around all the data we want to data bind, and perhaps even over other data structures. We can read the signal, we can update it, and we can get notified when it changed. And yeah, we can use this for data binding now. If we would not go with signals, we would just go with traditional variables, traditional data types like a flight array. We could populate this flight array and data bind it. If we go with signals, well, we just need to wrap up everything into signals. For this, we have this helper function now, beginning with Angular 16. We can use the setter to update the signal, and we can use the getter to read the signal. The getter is just the parentheses, full parentheses, as some people say. That means we just need to use the signal as a function. And yeah, this allows us to have let's call it a reactive way of change detection. Why would you do this, before you ask? Well, eventually, not now, but eventually, with upcoming versions of Angular, this is the way towards a fine-grained and zoneless change detection. Fine-grained means by using signals, Angular can update just little tiny portions of your component. Currently, always the whole component is updated. With this in the future, just little tiny parts of the components can be updated. So if something changes in the bottom right corner, only the bottom right corner needs to be updated. And this is our way to get rid of zone shares. So if you want to go zoneless, this will be how it works in the future. By the way, signals are super duper convertible to observables. That means if you love observables, or if you need the power of observables, debouncing and switch map and all the other goodness, then you can use them together with observables. There is a interop layer. This is something I really love. You don't need to unsubscribe from signals. It's done by Angular. Angular binds a signal to the lifetime of the current building block. And there is no need to update your code because also here, like with standalone components, the Angular team makes sure everything works in a backwards compatible way. You might want to use signals in the future. No one forces you to update your existing code.
Yeah, that mindset is, in my opinion, what has made Angular so consistent over the years is the attention to detail for backwards compatibility. And as you mentioned earlier, with standalone supporting modules, that you can selectively choose parts of your application to migrate to standalone or migrate to signals. Although,
Yeah,
word of warning, signals are still developer preview, so be cautious of using that in production as of now, but they're coming.
yeah, totally. We should be prepared for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, let's do a last demonstration on this. So in this last demonstration, I just want to migrate my flight search component to signals, because I think signals are quite a practical approach. We need to get our hands dirty with them to really find out what they are about.
Agreed.
It's a bit like, the 1980s. You don't know what they are about if you had not experienced them. And I think it's really similar with signals. So here we have a from property, and I just make a signal out of it. This helper function comes from Angular core. And if we look here, the result of this is a write-able signal, a signal we are allowed to update. And because of type inference, it even knows it's typed with string because obviously the default value was a string. So let's repeat this with the to parameter, the airport of destination, and with urgent. Here we have something that comes out of the store, a flights observable. I'm using nShareX here. And because I'm using nShareX version 16, the latest and the greatest, I can also leverage the select signal function, which is brand new and gives us back a signal. The basket here is a bit special. By intention, it's a bit special because just by looking at this value, the compiler, the TypeScript compiler, cannot find out that I want to use this object as a dictionary or as a record, as you would call it in TypeScript. And that's why I need to help the signal helper a bit. I need to tell it, hey, this is my type, by passing in this type parameter. And so it knows what I'm meaning. At least this was what I was hoping. Signal. Yeah, I need this guy here. One more time. Bob's your uncle. Okay, this was defining the signals. Now the next step is to read and write them. When reading them, let's go with full parentheses. Also here. When writing them, do I write them somewhere? No, I don't write them somewhere. But if I wrote them somewhere, I needed to go with the setter. There is a setter baked in to write it to this or that value. Also here, I want to update something via the store. And first of all, I need the current flight. I need the first flight because the first flight is the flight I want to delay. It's a special feature for the union, they want to delay the flights a bit to increase the pressure on management. And so I'm helping them here. And yeah, in the past, I needed to do something like this to take one and subscribe. Now I can just say, hey, my friend, please give me the contents of the flight signal. To be more precise, give me the first entry. And then let's take the ID of this first entry. And let's dispatch this action. Of course, this also works without state management, but here I really wanted to show how it correlates with NGRX. Okay, so this is everything from the perspective of the component, of the TypeScript part of the component, to be more precise. Now let's switch over to the template. The first thing is I want to data bind from. And unfortunately, ng model with the banana in the box syntax was not updated for signals so far. They will work on it. When doing this, I think they will renovate the whole forms package, the whole forms module. It really needs a renovation because meanwhile we have standalone stuff. Now we have signals. And so we can pluck two flowers with one pluck to kill two birds with one stone is what I want to prevent here. That's why I try to invent this metaphor with the flowers by now reinventing, renovating our forms module. I think it's the right time now. So for the time being, until this renovation happened, I do the two-way data binding by hand. Setter now. And let's do the same stuff here with 2. And the same stuff here with urgent. Okay, then who needs this if? Let's get rid of this to simplify this all a bit. Because, we don't want to spend our YAUF here. I think this is enough. It's that there's no reason why to repeat this example several times. This is where I'm reading my flights, and yeah, because signals are reactive, every time the flights are changing, Angular gets a notification, and so Angular will update here this component. It's really similar. Currently, it's similar to an observable with the async pipe. In the future, it will be the key for a more fine-grained update.
With the ng4 with flights, a lot of times with ng4s, especially with objects, it's best to use a track by function to not have to re-render each item within a list. Same concept with a signal, or is it keeping track of the same object instance within the signal if you were to do a set or an update?
Well, currently, indeed, it's really the same, at least in this case, as you went with an observable and the async pipe. Of course, you could nest your signals. This is something we are not used to because this was an anti-pattern and no-go in the world of observables. But in the world of signals, this is part of the game. So if we really wanted to update entries separately without updating the whole loop, iterating over all the entries in the array, then you could go with nested signals. It feels a bit strange, I know, but we are all creatures of habits, and if we look into other frameworks, it's part of the game there. The question is, do we really need it? We don't want to to over-engineer our stuff, but if you really need it, you could nest your signals. And this is one reason why I think stores like NGRX, but also other stores, will become even more important in the future, because we need some mechanism that gives us those nested signals. We don't want to hand nest them. It's not that funny. Okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes it looks a bit like ASCII art, like a Koopa in Super Mario, this little tiny tortoise or turtle. I don't know how you would call it. Yeah, but yeah, that's also part of the game. The thing is, as we have a reactive system now, we could now go all in with on-push. We could immediately activate on-push, and also we could react directly on changes. But before we do this, let's try out if everything works. Oh yeah, I messed up, of course. I data bound a function. The signal is a function. We need parentheses. And now we are talking again. Let's search for flights, and hey, it works.
Excellent.
And as mentioned before, because we have a reactive system now, we could now activate on-push. Let's do it quickly. Change detection strategy on-push. And we could directly react upon changes. Oh yeah, this is an error I'm getting quite a lot. Sometimes, you know, auto imports are not our friends. They don't deserve our love. But now we are talking. Okay, I think you had a question before. I interrupted you.
So one thing that people have brought up to me is, as we're using signals, we then have to, as we just saw, that you have to call the function to be able to read the value out.
Mm-hmm.
Is that opening the floodgates to using other functions within our templates?
That's a good question.
I'll let you answer that, but yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually really a good question, because we all learned that it is a no-go to use functions or methods in a template. However, the real reason for this rule was that sometimes a function could do something that is heavyweight. It could calculate something. And in those cases, this would really slow down the whole data binding performance. And that's why the general purpose go-to recommendation was to not do something like this. However, in the case of a signal, it's not that bad, because a signal is not doing heavy computations. It is just giving you the current value, and if something changes, in this case here, it's informing Angular that it needs to update the view, and that's it. And for this reason, it's okay to go with a function in here, as it would be okay to just go with a getter or a setter that is not calculating anything.
Yeah, the idea of not having function calls in a template is to prevent doing additional work, which would then cause re-renders of your component to be slow.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. So as mentioned before, we have a reactive system here, and that's why we can directly react upon changes. And this is really as easy as setting up a constructor. As calling an effect. Oh, come on, effect. Which is my side effect. And now look what I'm doing. I'm calling search. Oh, I'm in the wrong file. I'm very sorry. Constructor. I'm setting up an effect, and I'm calling search. And search, by the way, is reading those signals and searching for data. So the nice thing here is, effect is registering to all the used signals in here. to all the directly used signals, but also to all the indirectly used signals, like signals inside of the called search method. And so it knows when those signals are changing, and when they change, the effect is re-executed. And this gives us this nice reactive behavior. Frankfurt, San Francisco, I don't know, New York, you are on the East Coast, you told me. I think New York is my East Coast city I have in my system. Yeah, so it's really reactive now. And it was really simple. No pipelining, just calling this stuff inside of effect. You might now wonder, well, what if we need the power of our XJS? And the answer is, we could really combine this with the power of our XJS. You can convert a signal to an observable and vice versa, an observable to a signal. And this allows you to use the bouncing behavior of our XJS here, or stuff like switch map and so on and so forth.
I like that. And then would you then, so not to go through and set all of that up, but I'm assuming that you don't want to, when you're creating the observable, so what is it, to observable, that helper function, we don't necessarily want to drive that off of anything used inside of this.search. You would then essentially create a computed one based off of from and to, convert that to an observable, and then call search off of that, correct?
This is one option. Another option is to convert both of them into observers separately, and then use both of them together with the observable to do your piping, your debouncing, and so on. So I think both is fine.
Yeah.
If we have some time, we could do it. If you say, well, we are running out of time, then I can leave this to your or to the audience's imagination. And by the way, I have also a blog article where I'm describing all of this.
Yeah,
So what do you think?
I have a meeting that I need to, or some stuff I need to get to as well. So
No
I think
worries.
we'll call it there. But basically, there are two different helper functions to interop with RxJS, which are to signal, which allows
Yeah.
you to go from an observable to a signal, and then to observable, which takes a signal to, or and converts it to an observable.
Exactly. And it's a bit hidden. It's in here in Angular Core RxJS interop. And as I say, two functions going from A to B and going back from B to A. And for everyone who likes this pattern with take until, we now have this take until destroyed helper. Cool.
Is this code for this project available online if somebody wants to grab this and play with it?
Oh yeah, good question. I almost forgot about it. So first of all, perhaps I can conclude quickly. We have seen
Absolutely.
that this all is about modern Angular and lightweight architectures, or as I call it, it's about meeting the sweet spot, better meeting the sweet spot between under and over engineering. We have also seen that standalone components do a great deal here, and that also standalone APIs help us with our lightweight architecture. We've talked about functional services and signals. And one last thing I really want you to remember, please make sure that they don't tell you too much fairy tales. And as you ask about what's with the material, yeah, I already uploaded all this stuff here to my blog. You find it here. Follow me on Twitter to keep in contact. And my blog also has a blog article with all those experiments with signals, stuff we just discussed now.
And I am in the process of putting both your Twitter and blog posts in here.
Awesome.
Into the chat for everyone to see. There we go. Excellent. I appreciate you taking the time to go through this, explaining some of the new features within 16, and not just what they are, but how to best utilize them. Sometimes it's best to adopt things early, sometimes it's best to wait, but things to think about as you're adopting these technologies, and also how to structure your applications. That a lot of people jump straight to using NX, and that is a completely viable solution. However, there are some alternatives that may get you partially there without necessarily fully going to an NX solution. There's alternatives and there's varieties to all these different solutions.
Yeah. This is what this world is about, isn't it? It's about different options and finding out what fits best.
Absolutely. One thing we like to do at the end of the show is picks. So I don't know if you have any picks prepared, whether or not it's technology related, personal related, or anything else.
Yeah, we can try it. Do you have some concrete questions, or can I just give
Anything you
some?
want, anything in the world is valid.
Hmm. Well, I would really try out Angular 16 because it's really paving the way to the future of Angular, to a more lightweight future. And if you have not seen it, check out the third season of Star Trek Picard. It's really awesome. This time they really did their job. Good story, good acting. I really love it.
It's on my list of things to watch that I have not worked down to quite yet. But yeah, I've heard wonderful things as well about Picard.
Yeah, skip season 2. Let's pretend it never happened. But season 3 is really awesome.
Excellent. All right. Well, I didn't have anything else, but I look forward to speaking with you again. Again, Manfred will be at NGConf next month. If you're able to be there, be sure to grab him, say hello. And are you speaking? Are you speaking or no?
Yeah, I'm speaking. It's also a topic from this area. It's also from the area of how to make more lightweight architectures.
I like that. So I'll definitely be looking forward to checking out that talk. I appreciate you taking out the time to chat with us today. And be sure to tune in for other episodes of Angular Air.
Cool. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.